Welcome back. In this module, we will discuss what benzodiazepines are and how they became such a worldwide problem for millions of us who are just seeking some relief from the stresses of life. This module will give us some insight into what we are dealing with and may surprise you with the scope of the issue. I promise you one thing, you sure won't feel alone after you hear what I have to say. I'll also give you some insight as to what these drugs are actually doing in your body and why it can be so hard to kick them out of your system once and for all. Before we begin, I must issue a caveat, and I really hope you hear me on this one. I am in no way anti-doctor or anti-medicine. I respect both and know in my heart most doctors do an incredible job helping their fellow man while performing a really demanding and high-stakes job. My current doctor is a wonderful man, and I trust him implicitly with my well-being. I won't lie, like so many of you, for a long time I felt burned by doctors, so this took a long time to cultivate. He really had to earn it with me, and I know I challenged him and his patients. I sincerely hope you find a doctor you can work with as a team on your journey, but we will talk more on this a little later on. I really do feel grateful we live in an age of advanced and exciting medical breakthroughs. The time it takes to develop and perfect drugs is quite stunning, and my hat goes off to those who spend their lives trying to help others. My issue is the misapplication of drugs like benzodiazepines and the ignorance that made many of us need a program like this one after taking medicines we hoped were going to help us. That being said, let's look at why benzodiazepines are even the massive issue that they've become. So, I was a history teacher, and I think some history may be in order when it comes to benzos. I truly believe we need to understand what we are fighting against, and it may surprise some of you that the issue with benzos is not a new one. So we're an amazing species, us humans. We are equipped with some incredible survival traits, and one of them is that primal instinct of fight or flight. Our bodies are tuned to survive, and when threats come, we either fight back or we run. This adaptation saved us as a species from the cave bear and the saber-toothed tiger and is carried over in our beings into today's world. The issue for us today comes when our bodies won't turn this hypervigilance off and we are left with anxiety. For some of us, it's quite crippling, and if I may use the word, even disabling. For some of you, this is sounding really familiar. Now let's jump out of the caveman times into modern history. For all of us who have not been living under a rock in the past couple of years, you may know that modern life is full of its own anxieties. It's as real today as it was when we were back in the caves. People have been trying to use substances to smooth their worries since time began, but in the interest of time, let's fast forward a bit to the 20th century. Before the 1950s, various drugs called barbiturates were mainly prescribed to calm the anxieties and depressions of the masses. These barbiturates were incredibly powerful and left the users very sleepy, lethargic, and ridiculously groggy. Zombie-like is a great way of describing them. So taking these drugs wasn't exactly ideal for your average functioning human being with modern responsibilities. These drugs worked all right, that is if you could keep your eyes open long enough to get through the day. They were really too powerful, and they also carried an extreme risk of overdose death, which also is not ideal for your quality of life. So medical science was naturally looking for options that didn't have people drugged and zombified out of their minds as an alternative. Well, the anxious world rejoiced in the early 1950s when a new drug from a company called Wallace Industries was developed and marketed. It was called Milton, and it quickly eclipsed all the other drugs before it. Weird name, I know, but it was named after a town in New Jersey near the lab where it was created. Milton was basically a mild sedative with calming properties. In reality, it was a tranquilizer and could and was used on kids as young as 6. Milton was strongly targeted at women, especially housewives. This was a day and age when women were supposed to keep a neat house, have few if any opinions, and were expected to greet their husbands after work with a 3-course meal wearing pearls and heels, so let's not judge them too harshly for popping these pills every morning. You'd find ads for Milton in any number of popular magazines, especially women's magazines, and it was heavily pushed by doctors. By 1957, there was 1 prescription of Milton being prescribed every second. You do the math. It's a lot. In the early 60s, other drug companies wanted to capitalize on the massive success of Milton because, why not? Why let a fortune pass you by, right? Scientists made a new class of drugs that were entirely atomically different in the labs of the pharmaceutical giant Roche in Switzerland. This new drug combined a ring of diazepine atoms and a ring of benzene atoms, and voila, you guessed it, benzodiazepines were born. It was past what was called a cat test in labs, where it was literally given to kitty cats. These cats apparently went completely limp after taking these first benzos and acted very uncat-like in nature. If they can make a cat apathetic, it looked like a sure bet it would work on people. Thus was born the first benzodiazepine, and they named it Librium. Librium had some moderate success, but tweaks were quickly made to make a new benzo from its chemical base. 1963 was the banner year, however, when Librium was completely overshadowed by its stronger brother, Valium. Valium was 2.5 times stronger than Librium, and it made all other drugs seem like lightweights in terms of use and its ability to make big money. It hit the anxiety scene like a tidal wave and was prescribed left and right to just about anyone who asked their doctor for it. They were giving it out like candy, and the profits in turn were naturally massive. It became so common you could find it in most Americans' medicine cabinets, right next to the toothbrush, razors, and deodorant. The Rolling Stones even made a song about it, naming the title of the track Mother's Little Helper. The song explained the drudgery of a housewife's day and how popping this little yellow pill could get her through it to face yet another one. Hell, Mike Brady even talked about popping Valium on the pilot for the Brady Bunch, so you knew it had to be safe, right? So by the late 70s, Valium was as American as baseball and apple pie, and by the year 1978, it was the world's most prescribed drug. But issues were raising their ugly little heads among its users. Valium had some real nasty side effects, and concerns were being raised by those paying attention. Longtime users were struggling with some real excruciating physical and psychological issues. These same people were also reporting extreme difficulty coming off the benzos. Not to be deterred by a few folks' complaints, alprazolam was released into the growing benzo family in 1981. If this name doesn't sound familiar, you probably know it better as the most famous benzo of them all, Xanax. This new super benzo really packed a punch and was 20 times stronger than Valium. By 1986, Xanax had become the best-selling drug in history. So if you're counting up the years and the number of users, it may be a bit comforting to know you are far from the first one to fight this battle. Imagine, everyone that has taken these drugs has had to come off them at some point, so you're in good company. You're not alone in this fight. Don't you just hate that guy who tells you to look on the bright side? Let's fast forward a bit to more modern times. By 2013, 36 million Americans were on some sort of benzodiazepine, and the benzo market was valued at $3.5 billion in 2020. That's billion with a capital B. Looking worldwide, as of 2015, there are an estimated 12 million benzo users in the UK, but those numbers are undoubtedly low and have surely grown substantially. That is a significant number for both nations when you look at population numbers. And like I said, being outdated statistics, the amount of users is no doubt much higher. Creation of new drugs didn't stop at Xanax, and the benzo family continued to grow over time. As we talk, there are now over 40 different benzos marketed, but the main ones are Klonopin, Xanax, Cerax, Librium, Centrax, Ativan, Restoril, Halcyon, and Somnolin. Adding to this list are the Z drugs, which are classified as sedative hypnotics. Z drugs were developed to copy the effect of benzos, but aren't benzos, which is where it gets a little muddy and far too scientific for yours truly. We won't go down the Z drug road, but just know they copy benzos in nature, but often have the same long-term negative effects. Z drugs have only been approved for insomnia, and many will seem familiar, like Lunesta, Sonata, Ambien. Those are the main ones. Neat facts, Matt, but what are the benzos doing in my body? Now that we know a little history, let's get down to the meat of the issue and look at what the benzos are actually doing inside you. I know you're like me and you want an airtight answer as to what they are doing in your brain and body, and I hate to disappoint you. Unfortunately, the short answer is we're not completely sure what they are doing inside you. Theories abound and clinical research continues as we speak by people with a lot of degrees that I don't possess, so I trust them. As much as modern science knows about the body, the brain is still the hardest to quantify. The brain is like the ocean. As soon as we make a discovery, it opens the doors to a million new questions. Our understanding of it is ever evolving, as our understanding of how psychoactive medicines and other depressives interact with it. We know that benzos do indeed work, at least in the short term. We will talk exactly how short later on in Module 3. We do know benzos enhance a chemical in our brain called GABA, which many of you are quite familiar with. GABA is a chemical that basically tells millions of the neurons in our brains to slow down. If we can imagine the brain as a car, GABA is like the brakes. GABA impedes anxiety, controls our fear, and lessens stress. Like I said before, benzos don't make or create GABA, which many people believe, but enhance it, making its effects even more soothing. GABA also deters seizures and provides the hypnotic effects for inducing sleep, so it's safe to say it's pretty important. So it's clear that benzos can do some good, enhancing GABA and thereby slowing down the brain when we may face anxiety, stress, and worry. We also know for certain that benzos have a strong effect on dopamine, another valuable chemical in our brains. Dopamine is responsible for many of our emotions. It also has a large part in controlling the brain's pleasure and reward center. All addictive drugs, think alcohol, heroin, cocaine, etc., increase dopamine, including benzos. This is part of what gets you hooked on those innocent-looking little pills. Unconsciously, you will crave the benzos, even if you don't want to, or even know you were craving them, because they produce the dopamine and it is like an unconscious reward to your brain. We won't get too bogged down, but simply put, benzos slow and sedate your brain. Meanwhile, in the background, they are getting you hooked on using them. I mean hooked. Big time. When benzos are stopped, the neurotransmitters they've manipulated and changed over time are denied what they are used to getting, just like getting out of any addictive chemical. These neurotransmitters are the messengers of your central nervous system, and when they are altered and deprived of a drug, they throw your whole body off. This is where we enter withdrawal territory. People would often ask me what was going on with me in the depths of my withdrawals, like almost accusingly asking me. So many didn't believe what I was experiencing at all, and frankly, it made me angry. Essentially, they wanted to know what my problem was, and some of them were pretty rude about it. Still, I'd struggle with the answer because how do you explain something so earth-shattering as benzo withdrawals to an outsider? I'm sure they thought I was the world's biggest hypochondriac and exaggerator. When I did answer, I wasn't too far off in saying that to those that I trusted that my nerves felt fried. My body was adapting to not having the drug and it didn't like it. Many looked at me like I was crazy, and I get it. It's hard to explain what is unseen, but it's like coming off of any hard drug, and that's what they are. No one rolls their eyes at people in heroin withdrawals or quitting drinking, but they very well may at benzo withdrawals. But now you're informed, which I wasn't. The important thing, and I can't stress this enough, is that it will end. It did for me, and it will for you. Our bodies are amazing creations, and they want to heal. They want us to feel good and keep going on with life. Your body has always wanted to reach a balance, the homeostasis it craves, and it eventually will. It may take weeks, months, or even years to feel like yourself again, and that's just the hard truth. But never fear. Like I said, later in the survival guide, we're going to learn how to ease these symptoms. So it was over a year before I felt like I was back to normal, like really feeling like myself. This won't be everyone's story. Some will bounce back quicker, while others will take a little longer. You can't rush healing, and you'll be frustrated if you try. It'll all be worth it in the end. So, to wrap this module up, that's the science of benzodiazepines, brought down to its most simplistic levels. In Module 3, we'll explore the dark side of benzodiazepines, which will include possible symptoms, both neurological and physical. I stress the word possible because all of our benzo stories are going to be different. Remember, millions of us have been where you are now. You're going to beat this thing just like them, just like me.